Hello and welcome back to the My Betting Mate Kickoff podcast. We're here with episode 21, previewing the A-League Grand Final and wrapping up the Premier League as well as previewing the FA Cup. I'm joined once again by Nick Dabano. Nick, thanks for joining me.
No, thanks again for having me, Matt.
Yeah, we're approaching very quickly the end of the A-League season. We've obviously seen the Premier League come to an end and we have an FA Cup final coming up. So we'll start closer to home with the A-League. We have a grand final. It's Central Coast taking on Melbourne Victory at Central Coast. Obviously, the semi-finals, I think, went. I mean, the Melbourne Victory Wellington game was probably a bit more up in the air than the Sydney Central Coast game. But what was your take on the semi-finals?
Bonkers day of action. I mean, the Victory Wellington game was an incredible sort of from the 45th minute onwards. It felt like the second half into extra time. It was just had everything. The controversy surrounding the penalty that Wellington had. Whether it was a handball. For Daniel Arzani. I mean, he did handle the ball, but what's the rule when it comes to handball these days? Because we saw one later in the Mariners Sydney game as well, which wasn't given. So it just created more confusion. It was another great bit of heroics from Paul Izzo to save that penalty. And then, the drama at the end, Traore thinking he's won the game for Victory with that incredible long-range shot that Oscar Zavada getting that equaliser, which was a beautiful moment. The packed house in Wellington absolutely losing their minds, scoring with essentially the last kick of the game to send it to extra time. And then right place, right time, Chris Economides being able to bundle home the winner and Victory able to hold firm. I mean, this Victory team, they just keep finding a way. Twice now, against City, they were behind. They were able to come back and win that game on penalties when really, down to 10 and you had to show so much resilience just to be able to get that game to extra time. And then again, going to a very hostile atmosphere, playing spoiler in front of a crowd that was, wheeling that Wellington team over the line to try and get that fairy tale of, rising up the standings and everything, but just falling short and Victory get there. And then, we saw in that second game, Sydney threw everything at the Mariners. They were unlucky. They had the ball in the back of the net. Well, not in the back of the net, but over the goal line, I should say. And then, there's the controversy around the offside. I mean, it didn't go on about VAR all day, but, I think Sydney felt quite hard done by in that moment. And then obviously there was the penalty shout as well, but they peppered the Mariners goal. But Central Coast were able to hold firm. And I think, when you look at their body of work throughout the whole final series, they deserve to be there. They've probably been the best team since round 4, since losing those first 4 games of the year. They've only lost twice, and now they're on the precipice of winning a treble. But Sydney would feel hard done by that at least this game didn't go to extra time and they didn't have a chance to extend this and make things a little bit more interesting. But nonetheless, we're here now. We're off to Gosford and the Mariners taking on Victory, which is going to be a great grand final. Yeah, obviously 2 teams have in the regular season, they've played each other 3 times. Victory haven't been able to win any of those games. We've had 2 draws and a Central Coast win. So they played each other in December and it finished 2-2. Goals to Quol, Fornaroli, Valupale and then Torres who equalised in Game 2. It was a 1-1 draw in January, a penalty for Arzani and then Reese with a goal to level the scores there. And then the one game that did have a winner was the most recent in February. Bit of an ill-tempered one. I think there were 3 red cards in that one. And Mariners took the win 1-0. If you look at the stats from those 3 games, they're all relatively even games. So I think, it's set up to be a tight grand final. And I think a bit like the semi-finals, it's going to really come down to which team is more proactive. I think not to discredit the great work that Giancarlo Italiano did at Wellington, but I think letting that first 45 minutes just be so tepid and nervy and not wanting to give anything up as opposed to going for a goal, it was always going to explode in the second half. And Victory are kings of those sort of games, I think. So, how do you sort of see it playing out on in the big dance? This is a fascinating matchup because you mentioned these 3 games between the 2 sides have been very, very closely fought. I mean, I remember when they played that first game in Gosford, Victory looked for all money they were going to win that game. I mean, Fornaroli scoring one of the goals of the season that game, Nishan Valupale giving them the lead. But, the Mariners did well to come back. That was at the point of the year where the Mariners were still finding their feet in the season as well, and it was a big point for them. Victory was still undefeated. the Unite round game where they drew 1-1, Victory really should have won that game. They were up for most of it. They conceded so late. They had chances to really put that game away. They didn't take them. And, you know, as we've seen with Victory so many times this year, you know, either they've been the team that's come back and gotten results, or they've given up leads. Like we've seen it quite a few times throughout the journey of this year. In that final meeting, you know, the red cards there's a bit of controversy about those red cards, as you mentioned. But, you know, the Mariners really should have won that game by a lot more. Remember Josh Nisbet's miss at the end there with an open net. But this is going to be a fascinating matchup because, you know, there's certain chess pieces now that Victory can move going into this one. They get Zinedine McCash back from suspension, which you can't understate how big of an inclusion that is. I mean, they've started Rolly Bonavazzi the last 2 games, but McCash gives them so much more than Bonavazzi in all due respect. He's been one of the best players in the league this season. Bonavazzi, you'd think, would move to the bench. McCash plays as that number 10. You'd think that everything else in and around that would be quite settled with Arzani and Valupale out wide, Fornaroli up front. But Victory haven't had, I guess, the output from Fornaroli that we've seen, you know, throughout the season the last few weeks. He's gone a few games now without a goal, but having McCash out there gives him that second option because the goals that have come, they've come the last 2 games, I mean, it's come from unlikely sources. I mean, Adama Traore scoring his first goal in over 10 years. Chris Economides, who has struggled to find the back of the net at his time in Melbourne Victory, you know, popping up in the right place at the right time. So having McCash out there gives him a little bit more of an X factor going forward. Conversely, for the Mariners, I mean, it'll be fascinating to see what sort of lineup. I think it'll be quite settled with what they've gone with, you know, with Mikael Docker on one of those wings, with Christian Theoharis on the other, and Nisbet and Quoll playing as that front two. But I think the Mariners have to go for the kill early. I think you are right when it came back to Wellington. Like, you know, they just let Victory settle and settle and settle. Same thing with City. You know, City had the chance to put that game away against Victory. And the more you keep them in the game, the more Victory are able to build into this. And I think if the Mariners can get the crowd behind them, you know, get an early goal, it's going to be really hard for Victory to get back. But the more this game stays 0-0, the more that Victory are able to suck the crowd out of this game, make this a dogfight, make this game in the mud, it's going to become even more and more difficult for Central Coast. So I think that's going to be the fascinating part of this one. So if Victory can strike early, though, and take an early advantage, I think that's when we're going to have to see how the Mariners can respond to being behind, because usually the Mariners are the team striking first. So it's going to be an interesting one, but I think those first 45 are going to be key.
Yeah, I think, you know, I sort of understand why teams do try and lock it down against Victory early, because they have shown, you know, over the years that the more the game opens up, the more dangerous that they are. But like you say, the longer they're in the game, the possibility of them nicking a goal, you know, like Wellington, I guess if Traore took that shot, you know, 100 times, they'd probably only go in 5 times. So, you know, I guess Wellington might feel like in that instance they were a bit unlucky. But yeah, definitely I think Central Coast have shown so much potential to score goals all year when they've really gone for it. And I think that's going to be, I think they have to take that risk early to really put this game to bed. You know, the crowd will obviously be a factor. It's at Central Coast's home stadium instead of being moved to Sydney as we normally see for these grand finals. But Victory will take a solid contingent of fans
Absolutely,
over.
Yeah.
Certainly more than they would at a regular season game. And like in my pre-game reading, I saw that Victory haven't actually won at Central Coast for 5 years. So the last win they had there is 2019.
And that's when the Mariners were a vastly, vastly different team to what they are now. You know, it's like they were the basket case of the league for so many of those years.
Correct. So, I think Mariners really do have to get their crowd up and about as much as possible. Whereas, you know, Victory, I think they'll sort of maybe let Central Coast dictate the first, you know, 30 minutes and see how they respond from there. But yeah, I think Mariners hold the key to this game, and they've been just so good at managing their fixture list, their squad, and yeah, I think they're the ones that hold the keys to sort of how this game pans out.
It's going to be interesting because, I mean, the Mariners at home, this is a big opportunity for them. You know, they're going to be galvanised by that crowd. It's a massive moment for the town of Gosford as well, and just that Central Coast area, because they are the only team in that section. The Mariners are, you know, they represent the entire Central Coast. They haven't got an NRL team or an AFL team that they're competing with. It is just them.
Yeah.
So this is a huge moment for that community, especially when you look at what is at stake beyond that, because, you know, they won the championship last year, but this year they've already taken home a premiership. They've taken home the AFC Cup. they had the chance to become the first Australian team to win the treble, which is an incredible feat in of itself. When you look at the journey of the Mariners this season, you know, last year was such an incredible team that they had with Cummings and with Silvera and with Nkololo and all that talent they had, Nectar Triantis. Nick Montgomery leaves as well, goes to Hibs. They have to rejuvenate the entire squad. They bring a new manager in on the eve of the season, all these new players as well. And they started the season. I mean, it's easy to forget. They had lost their first 4 games of the year. You know, this season looked, after that loss against Brisbane, like this is not looking good. I mean, went back to an older press conference and someone actually said to Mark Jackson after that, like, you know, how do you salvage this season? Like, it's not looking great for you guys at all. But the way that they rebounded, the way that they just stuck to their principles, and Mark Jackson was able to embed his style. They were able to bring in new players, and, you know, the existing players on that team have now risen, you know, like, I mean, Josh Nisbet's taken his game to another level this year. You know, Brian Keltack and Dan Hall have gone to another level. Jacob Farrell. We've seen Mikael Docker become such a big part of this team in the second half of the year. And they've just kept finding a way to win games. Like, it hasn't always been pretty with them. No. Like, I think the one thing the Mariners have done really well is adapt because of all the travel with the AFC Cup and everything like that. And that travel can break a team.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we see it even in Europe when teams have got to balance Champions League and league commitments. It's so hard. But the Mariners are doing travel, you know, the other side of Asia. Like, you know, they had to go to Oman to play an AFC Cup final, then get all the way back to play that final against Sydney, and they're still able to win.
Yeah.
It just doesn't faze them. So, you know, that you'd think that at home they should be able to get this job done. But this is a victory team right now that are riding that wave.
Yeah.
And momentum is such a powerful thing in football. And this run does remind me a little bit of that the last time they won the championship in 2018.
Yeah.
You know, when... You know, they had given no hope going up against Sydney in that semi. They beat Sydney.
Yeah.
They went to Newcastle again. You know, a team that were flying at that point, a team that were galvanised by the home support, playing in Newcastle. Yes, you can talk about the circumstances around the winning goal, but they still got the job done. And you know what? Like, it's why you just have that unearned feeling of. It feels like it's going to happen again. And the other added subplot that this is the 5th opportunity now for Tony Popovich to win an A-League Grand Final. I mean, so close so far with Western Sydney 3 times. You know, losing that one with Perth Glory on penalties. I mean, it has to be sort of burning in him to finally get that A-League championship as well.
Yeah, I think the Popovich element to this is certainly interesting. You know, it's remarkable for a coach of his caliber to have gotten to that final so many times and just never quite been able to get the job done. You know, it's all a bit coincidental. I don't think it's a mark against him as a coach or anything like that, but it has to play on his mind a little bit, surely. And I don't know how much it would affect the players from their points of view, but you know, it would be a great moment for Popovich, particularly with some of the criticism he's copped over you know his victory reign. I mean, he's got an Australia Cup under his belt, so to win this, you know, would really make a great statement or put him right up there as one of victory's best ever.
Well, of course. I mean, he also beat the Mariners in that Australia Cup final as well, and we can't forget as well, he won the Asian Champions League, you know, 10 years ago.
Correct.
He's won almost everything else, won a premiership as well, but he's never won that championship. This would just be that final notch. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen next season. I mean, he's out of contract at the end of the year. Does he stick around at Victory even if they win the championship or not? It's a big decision that Victory's, you know, they've still got to make, you know, in regards to even Popovich to make and the Victory board to make, you know, as to what direction they want to go in after this. But it's massive for him. It's massive for Victory in of itself to be able to, you know, win a championship for the first time in 6 years, because this is a team that has been, I think, you know, for the last 6 years, they've been starved of success. A club of Victory's ilk are not used to having this period of downturn. I mean, they were right down the doldrums. They've had to work their way back up. This season looked, at some point, you know, it looked like they were going to be the team that just waltzed their way to the title at the start. But then the second half of the year, things started to fall apart, and there were, I think, rightfully doubts about where this team was going to be at in finals. They were minutes away from being eliminated in that final against Melbourne City, but they've found a way. They've been able to get the job done time and again, and they're not going to be fazed by going up to Gosford and giving these guys a red-hot crack. Yeah.
All right, so prediction time. How are you tipping this one?
It's going the distance.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going all the way to penalties, but we're getting extra time in this game.
Yeah.
I think Victory win. I think Victory get the job done. It feels like everything is moving in this direction. I've tipped against Victory in that semi-final against Wellington, and I felt like I had egg on my face afterwards. I'm going to back him in for this. As much as it'd be a great moment for the Mariners to win the treble, I just get this sense that Victory are going to win this grand final in a scrappy extra time victory over Central Coast.
Yeah, I backed Victory to overcome Wellington. I have more doubts in this one. I feel like, Central Coast may have learned from maybe perhaps where Wellington went wrong, in my opinion, I guess, early in that home semi-final that Wellington had. It's a one-off game. Central Coast have proven this season, whether it's in a league home and away format, whether it's the cutthroat, knockout situation of the AFC Cup. They know how to win these games. They know how to manage the games over, the 90 minutes. I'm struggling. There's the big part of me that thinks Victory, like you say, they'll ride this wave and nick it potentially in extra time. But I actually think Central Coast will get the job done in 90 minutes.
Interesting.
I think it'll be tight. It might be, decided in the last 15 or so minutes. But for me, I think both teams will score, but I think Central Coast will edge it within the 90 minutes. So we'll have to wait and see. It should be a really entertaining fixture. And, hopefully a great end to what's been a pretty memorable A-League season, I would say. It's been, been some great games to watch this year. And, hopefully it ends on a deserving note. I guess we'll finish off this week by looking at the Premier League. Obviously, we had the final round of fixtures, and I guess as probably expected, Manchester City finish on top. They've won 4 Premier League titles in a row now. Credit to Arsenal. They really did push them until the last day. But, they're just undeniable at the moment, Manchester City. The depth in talent that they have. When you think of how long they had to manage without players like Kevin De Bruyne, Haaland missed, quite a few games as well, but still scored almost a goal a game in the league. What's it going to take to stop them?
I mean, how can you stop them?
A nation state.
The fact Arsenal, still got 89 points this season and still didn't win the league it's a testament to Man City. I mean, they put it away early. Foden scored in the first 2 minutes, and that was that. I mean, West Ham tried to get back in the game. It was a great goal from Mohamed Kudus, but you know what? Credit to them. They just had to stay in the fight. They have been there and done that. We've spoken about it for weeks now that it felt like a sense of inevitability. I mean, Arsenal pushed them and pushed them and pushed them, but you need to be nearly flawless to knock this mob off. They just keep getting better. Gvardiol, Jeremy Doku coming in and having a great season, Mateo Kovacic. This team is going to get better as well. They're going to find a way to regenerate. The next big star will probably end up falling into their laps. I mean, it's going to take something quite special to knock these guys off. I mean, you think about this reign of dominance over the last few years. The only team that's really been able to knock them off was Liverpool in that COVID season. And even then, I mean, it's just so hard. It is just so hard. You need to be at your absolute just best for minute 1 to the match day 1 to match day 38, which is so hard when you've got to manage everything else. I think, if you're Arsenal, it's going to be an interesting off-season to see what direction they go in with. I think it's more about just building the squad. I think they've got a really good squad, but now just looking for what the next, who's that next player who's going to take him to that next level? Is it looking for, that number 9 who's going to be able to bang in 25 plus goals in a season? I mean, they're not growing on trees, top quality number 9s. We see how hard it is to find that sort of striker. I mean, what do Liverpool look like under Arne Slot next year to replace Jurgen Klopp? I mean, it's so hard then, to even look at who's that next sort of echelon, because as much as Chelsea, they've moved on from Maurizio Pochettino, what does their outlook look like next season? What does Manchester United's outlook look like next season? That gap is just so big. So it's going to be a fascinating off-season to see, what happens with Arsenal, to see what happens with Liverpool, to see if they can bridge that gap. But I just don't know whether anyone can really stop City at the moment. I'm fascinated to see what this off-season brings, though, what players come in, what the new philosophy looks like with some new coaches in board. But, City they're just incredible.
Do you think the financial charges around City, they put an asterisk on some of this success? Or
I think, it's going to constantly be a talking point, isn't it? I think it constantly will be.
I guess until there's some finality on where these charges actually end up. But, I sort of do feel for the clubs like Arsenal, like Liverpool, who in any other year have title-winning years, and they're just up against this
Juggernaut,
financial behemoth with resources that, every other club can only really dream of. I think it's a credit to the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal to have been able to even push them to the point, that they have over the last few seasons. It's just I understand why financial fair play sort of been bought in, and but I also understand the perspective that it's like the old rich trying to protect their patch. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where these charges lay. Really what I want is just to see some resolution of some sort sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
because
some clarity.
If they are doing the wrong thing by the rules, whatever, whether or not you agree with the rules or whatever, but if they are doing the wrong thing, what does that mean for the seasons that have already been played?
But also on top of that, like, look at how Everton copped it.
Yeah.
Look at how Nottingham Forest copped it.
Yeah.
Luckily they survived. We don't know what's going to happen next with that as well. It's still in the hands of the courts. We assume that they've survived this season.
Yeah.
But it's not even just that. You look down the pyramid when teams face financial uncertainty and the way that the EFL comes down on some of these clubs. You look at how clubs that have gone insolvent, have had bad owners and everything like that. And City at the moment have just been able to go business as usual. These charges are looming, but we don't really know exactly how it's going to be. But Everton and Nottingham Forest, it's been like
dealt with straight away.
Yeah.
Like.
So what's the hold up? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. All right, will be interesting. And we've spoken a little bit about Arsenal. Really, I think the difference there is just depth and
that Christmas run I think cost them though. I think at the end when you look at it all, that Christmas run absolutely cost them.
There was an interesting comment from Rodri. I think he was being interviewed pitch side, and he said even maybe the other difference is just mentality. When Arsenal went to the Etihad, he felt like they were just content with the draw, whereas City want to win every game against any opponent. So maybe that's something to be said there. I thought that was an interesting perspective from the players. But yeah, I think definitely at the end of the day, when you've got world class, 3 world class players almost in every position, you can navigate those busy periods. Whereas Arsenal might have 1 to 2 world class players in every position, but they're definitely plugging holes in others, particularly up front where I think they missed that focal point. That's probably going to be the difference. We've touched on the coaching changes already. So Pochettino gone from Chelsea. Roberto De Zerbi has left Brighton. Moyes has departed West Ham. We've seen Klopp leave and replaced by Arne Slot. And I guess the other big question mark at the moment is Erik ten Hag, which gives us a nice segue into the FA Cup final. I mean, how do you think his future hangs in the balance on that game, or do you think he's done either way?
I don't know. It's hard to get a read 'cause it's this new sort of management that's come in. I think honestly, regardless of what happens, I think the papers might be stamped. If they've made a decision on his future, it might not really might really matter.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Mourinho, I think, won the
Van Gaal. Van
Gaal. Van Gaal won the FA Cup and he was still gone. So if they've made a decision already, but it all comes back to like you've got to make sure you've got your replacement lined up because who's the next one to come in and actually replace him. Who's the top free agent? I mean, Chelsea now have got to go look for another coach again. I mean, De Zerbi's been linked with that role, but he's been linked with a bunch of other roles across Italy as well because the Juventus vacancies come up, the AC Milan vacancies come up, Napoli's got a vacancy. Bayern Munich have got a vacancy as well. Like there are a lot of big clubs looking for new coaches at the moment, so it's almost about acting quickly to bring in whoever that next free agent coach is. So. Who knows? Maybe United might stick it out for one more season with Ten Hag regardless. Maybe they're just going to go, you know what, like there's just not another option. But is that really going to be conducive to turning the table at Manchester United? Like what is the answer? Look, I think City are going to win this FA Cup final. I think, we saw last year they won the exact same fixture against United. I mean, look, City have, more often than not won these finals. I mean, bar that real anomaly, where they lost in 2013 to Wigan, which was a great moment. The famous Ben Watson 90th minute header. But other than that, really, they've been basically flawless in these sort of situations. United, it's going to take something quite special for them to be able to win this one. But I think City are going to come away with the win and wrap up yet another piece of silverware.
Yeah, I think the stars have to align perfectly for United. I think, Ten Hag's spoken a lot about the number of injuries he's had to contend with. And, United have been like absolutely ravaged with injuries, and they just don't have the depth that other clubs do. I mean, they've got, I guess, the silver lining in their season has been the emergence of and the improvement in their youngest players. You know, Kobe Main, who's been amazing out of the academy and a real gem for the club. Hoyland, I think, as the season progressed, has shown. So I don't think he's nowhere near his potential or his best yet, but in periods he showed what a fantastic striker he can be. And Garnacho, again, you know, I think like most young players in his sort of position, particularly those flary type players, they will have their ups and downs, but his ups have been very, very good. So, you know, look, on the injuries front, I think this is really United's second season where injuries have been a real problem for them. So I don't know what's going on in training. Are they being worked too hard, pushed too hard? Are the facilities and the staff not up to it in terms of managing these players? Or is it a fact that, you know, Ten Hag doesn't really trust the depth he has, that he's throwing players in when they're not perhaps fully fit, and they're suffering the consequences of that. But, you know, in terms of this one-off game, I just think without their absolute best 11 on the park, which, to be honest, I don't even really know what United's best 11 looks like anymore, because players that used to be a lock, like a Casemiro, you know, he's been all over the place the last few weeks, and you know, Jamie Carragher's sending him off to the US or Qatar or Saudi Arabia, wherever he wants him to go. But you know, like without that best 11 on the field, it's really hard to tip against City. Like you say, they're riding high on the success of a Premier League win. You know, they don't have a Champions League final to worry about this year, which they did, you know, last time around. So, you know, it'll be their absolute best squad taking on United. And yeah, very hard, unfortunately, to see anything other than a City win. But this is what the Cup's all about, I guess. You know, United knocked off Liverpool on the way to the final, so they'll hold out some hope. But yeah, maybe I'm a bit pessimistic these days with United, but struggling to see them beating Manchester City. Well, that'll wrap up the kickoff for this week. So thanks once again, Nick, for joining me.
No, thanks again, Matt.
Thanks for tuning in over the course of the season, and we'll catch you next year.